All right, so we just ended also um, talking about the extent of Roman rule, and here Hadrian's uh, massive wall fortification from the second century CE all the way in the British Isles, um, and the reach in which Rome had, and their encounters with other peoples we were discussing. So one, I want to talk about Rome and the Parthian Empire. The Parthian Empire was, of course, the Persian Empire. So, one thing that I want to kind of point out is not only as we read this competition that existed, as we remember that Rome took over parts of the Hellenized world, and they brought into their own culture what we could dub as a Greco-Roman culture. Many elites were learning Greek as much as Latin, and in certain parts of the empire, Greek was really still more of a focus in the eastern part than the Latin. And so we know that the Greeks had this motif of showing the Persians as the other. And as we remember, the Persians were really the first quintessential barbarian, according to the Greeks, but they were seeing them more as effeminate and girlish, right? Um, and so even the term barbarian, which is comes from the Greeks, is going to come into the Roman world, but then seen more or less in the way that we think of barbarian, as just wild, untamed, uncivilized, rawr, battle axe running with wild hair kind of thing. That's kind of the idea. And then also the continuation of a competition with the Persians. And so it solidifies again this kind of the Eastern other that is going to pop up all the way even into some of the discourse when talking about the Middle East now and West versus the East. Iran or Iran is ancient Persia, is Persia, if that hasn't been made clear yet, okay? And Persians speak an Indo-European language. They're not Arabs. They've never been. They've had it's been multi-ethnic in many cases, but the Persians are Indo-European speaking. Just to let you know, even Iran means Aryan, land of Aryans, and I just kind of wanted to point that out. And they have that legacy. Later, they're going to become dominated by the Muslims, and we will see later in the few centuries that the Persian Empire will be incorporated into the Islamic world. But for now, that's not the case. But this discourse of East versus West really gets solidified continually through here. And I kind of want you to see that and think about that. The long intellectual heritage that we take in from the Greeks and the Romans up until modern times when we think about this East versus West type of idea, okay? Now, we could have thought about, West or Northern issues, but again, remember, the barbarians of the West are what's going to become those of us of European background, okay? And that the Roman world will not be able to integrate in the same way, the Eastern part, okay? All right, so that's all I really want to say on that for now. The Parthian Empire is interesting in its own way. It's a mixture of Hellenism and Persian traditions, but we're going to just kind of break away from that and focus now on Roman encounters with Germanic peoples. And I just want to say this is something that I've even been exploring more and more. That it's the Romans who create this idea of a Germanic people and give that term. And these various peoples, are kind of like all Native American people in Africa. even though their languages were related and that their customs and cultures had many similarities, they most likely did not see themselves as the same kind of people. And they fought among themselves. And one of the things that Rome could do was buy off one group at the expense of another. It's exactly what the British did with Native Americans in the United States, in North American continent, and it's also what Americans did. I mean, even Andrew Jackson persecuted Native Americans with the help of other Native Americans. They were not unified, and this is something that I kind of really want to point out more. That has really been my kind of recent epiphany as I've been rethinking Western culture. Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, when we think of black tribes with chiefs and polytheism and fighting each other over various little lands, and we look at we look over in northern part of the American continent, Cherokee, and other groups there, Sioux, so on. Those from Europe were really the same as all these other groups, except whiter. That everybody was basically pagan, tribal. And it's Rome who comes out on the frontiers and pushes this idea of a unified nation state and this idea of civilization and the characteristics that we define as civilization. So is it any wonder then, and this is just my thought, okay? So I'm just letting you know, this is just your professor kind of addressing a thought that I want to encourage you to think about. I'm not making a finalized statement on this, but I wonder if those of us who come out of the Western European world that are of Germanic Celtic descent think of our own ancestors as barbarians because the Romans did, and that we then kind of bought into that Roman idea of our pre-Roman experience ancestors, then wouldn't it make sense that as European nations come in contact with other nations that have not been quote-unquote civilized, that they become the next barbarians and that they are to be looked down upon in the way that we even continue to look down on our own ancestors? So sub-Saharan Africans and Native American peoples and any groups that don't have a nation state with a flag and some sort of hierarchical imperial type of army and nation state would then be treated as the record gave the Roman legacy of these, again, so-called barbarian peoples. And so we look at the complexities that then this left behind. And for Europe, this wasn't thoroughly, Nazi Germany we should talk about. The Nazis actually addressed this whole issue of pre-Roman Germany. As a matter of fact, on one hand, they were playing into this idea of being a Reich, of being a new Rome. And on the other hand, taking Roman sources about Germans and seeing themselves as ultra indigenous and using Tacitus's works, by the way, to justify a kind of like a pan-Germanic vision. And even like we take like Wagnerian operas, the classical composer, and all of these kind of issues that are going to end up happening in all modern forms of romantic nationalism in Europe is going to be rooted back in this kind of unsettled, uneasy consciousness of this barbarian past that is there. And just think about this. France is going to be named after the Franks, who are a Germanic tribe. You're going to have Germany is called in German Deutschland. The word Deutsch originally meant people, land of the people, and that's very vague. Just as the Macro-Manni Confederation was able to push back on the Romans, again, these were just confederations. How they even identified themselves is so blurry. All of the Germanic people, the culture of Western Europe, is essentially erased or forgotten or lost and has to become reinvented later often utilizing the lens that the Romans portrayed them as. And so I think then looking at this long process in which they were brought in, you'll see later I'm going to go over how modern Europe then has to reinvent itself and fantasize about its past. And to this day, these trappings are still something that have to be dealt with. As Americans, we, I think, most easily forget this because we already cut ourselves off from Europe. And in fact, most Americans know nothing about their own European heritage. And it's not so much as a concern or thought of, in the way that maybe even people in Europe now still might have kind of hanging over them. People in Iceland have their Viking sagas, and again, the Germans have Tacitus writings that portray them in a certain way. So in any case, I hope you're following what I'm trying to get at. And if this seems vague to you, please question me on this. I will end this part right here.